So we thought we'd do a big group meditation. No, just
That's
kidding.
right. Get ready. It's so great to be here and be at awe after so much time looking forward. I feel this conversation is one that spans beyond boundaries, and certainly Nanea and I are looking forward to just talking with you about the ways that we approach well-being and see a mindful metaverse. I know that M word has come up a lot today, right?
Yeah, and I do think there's a very dystopian narrative that is popular in the media around the metaverse, and there are companies like Tripp and others, and the work that Caitlin's doing to create a different narrative, a different story around how do we use these technology interfaces to expand the human experience. And really, I think a lot of the early things that we've seen around the metaverse currently have been about, like, how do we turn it into a virtual shopping mall that we can take our digital twins to and buy digital Nikes. And you know, I've been very public about saying if that's all we build, we should just throw the towel in and say that we suck and go home. So I'm happy to see so many wellness-focused companies in this space working in XR. And you know, and that the venture community, we just announced a big investment in our company today from Bitcraft Ventures and Qualcomm, HTC, Amazon, and Niantic, and also ongoing support from Mayfield, who believed in us in the very beginning. So, you know, it's now really here, and it's very exciting time for us as an industry as well.
Absolutely. I think we're at a stage where there's no longer the same sort of stigma about well-being, health. It can be universal, and people approach it in a very human-centric way.
Right.
And I'm finding a lot of the approaches to metaverse, if you talk about mindful, you know, the metaverse has been described as spatialized and social and shared. But what about the other S's that I'm working on developing, which have to do with multisensory, so feeling it in many different ways,
right,
having that somatic element where you actually can isolate in your body, your physical body, where something in XR is affecting you. And then those final S's that I write about that are soulful and storied.
Right.
So these mindful metaverse applications, and I think Tripp is a great example. You know, how are we sharing use cases that have stories that show our meaning and have human-to-human interactions that are essentially liberating?
Well, that's something I've always liked talking to you about, because you reached out to me when we first got funded. And that's the other thing I love about the XR community is how, you know, we're all really pioneering this space. There's no playbook. We're all figuring it out as we go. And you use the hero's journey and the concept of that a lot in your work. And what we were doing at Tripp originally was, let's focus on experience and embodiment. Instead of telling you to be calm by, you know, listening to someone in a Celtic voice tell you to inhale and exhale, in XR, we can show your breath as stardust coming out of your mouth, or make you feel like you're floating up into another dimension. And, you know, we've done well building that foundation of giving experiences that are architected for design and wonder. But what we see is that people do need a sense of more of a journey. And now, as we expand our product offering, we're starting to think about, you know, how do we give you some framework where you can tell your own personal journey as you evolve in mind, body, heart connections?
That's exactly it. I think the hero's journey is a framework, and so many people used to approach devices and see, oh, you know, they'd say to me, oh, this is an exotic animal. What is the device? How do I interact with it? And it was more focused on, say, the hardware. And with the idea of approaching something mindfully, you see that there's a crossing of a threshold into an unknown space. So there's a lot of emotional design that goes into XR. And to guide somebody on that journey, they get to play the hero. You see that sense of discovery. I've seen it in people. That's what I call wonder face. I don't know how many people have put on a device or a headset and then their mouth drops open in a big O.
Well, that's why we called it Tripp, too. A lot of people think it was because, we're trying to create acid trips in VR or something. But, I had the good fortune of being a very early investor in Oculus because I had worked with the founding team at a cloud gaming company. And so I had early access to equipment. So everyone was at my house trying, these VR experiences. And they would take it off their head and they would go, wow, that was a trip. And that's how we named the company, actually, because it was out of that. And, that concept of, we first started thinking about how do we simulate the real world. We thought we would start you off on a beach. And it didn't feel good, these simulated environments. And so we started really leaning into, okay, what does a cosmic flotation tank feel like, And how do we get you to inhale and connect you to the breath and show that? And we could make you float up and feel like you're moving into another dimension. So it really became this idea of creating experiences you can't have in this world that really opened our minds up beyond sort of the mental models we were holding, and people still do, on like what it means to meditate and meditate in VR. Could we get you to experience calm? Could we get you to experience focus, and then be able to start to carry that out into your physical reality?
That's a great point for next gen wellness, because we're not replicating what would be expected.
Right.
And I think that there are all kinds of stereotypes about what would be mindfulness, and I say it, and you might imagine a tropical beach.
A waterfall.
And, a waterfall. Yeah. and we have a certain element. I know that our mind is looking for patterns, and it's always, the research on wonder that I do shows that when the pattern breaks, that's when there's surprise.
Wow.
That's when there's delight. So how can we take these patterns and play with what we know best about human psychology and get people into a state of a mindset where they are in creative flow? They're part of an experience. They're not just passively receiving it, but they're part of the co-creation where we're going beyond our physical reality. And then back to that hero's journey, we take it back into the physical world and feel more empowered.
Yeah, and you mentioned flow. Like Beat Saber is a flow state generator. It's got all the mechanics of it, the skill challenge ratio, the embodiment, the constant reward feedback loop, right? And the progression. Good game balancing will generate a flow state. And, so we know that people are happier in flow state. They have a different sense of identity. In flow state, they have a different relationship to time. And this is why I think some of these concepts around the metaverse that we're throwing around, like avatars that have fixed gender norms and, our digital twins, there's the ability to lose your sense of self. I agree with what Rick Catello was, my old boss, John Riccatello, CEO of Unity, was talking about this morning, that you want to sometimes drop yourself. And why can't we have different experiences? I'm a gamer, for a long time, and I would create different characters for different games. I don't want to be the same persona,
agree.
Right?
Yeah. I grew up as a scientist and an artist, and I really feel core that each of us contains multitudes. That's Walt Whitman. But I think we have a chance right now in XR to look beyond those perceived limits, and when you see that there's a freedom to choose the avatar, again with intention, have that be part of your identity in a way that's intersectional, then you tell somebody else, this is how I would like to be reached. And then we're in a deeper state of listening. So I think
or
that,
what is an I, in a digital space? Can we start to look at community differently as collective consciousness, collective identity, in ways that might have real world translations that are positive? So these are kind of some of the, like just a simple example. Why does an avatar have to have 2 arms? Why can't I spawn off 6 more to play digital instruments that can only be played in the metaverse.
Right. Why can't
Do you know?
it be
And
colors?
why can't a concert involve having access to those virtual instruments, and we can all co-create the experience and contribute to it?
We could have
You
a
know, what is
collective-
harmony?
Right, harmony, collective
Right.
coherence.
Right.
I could pick a color based on my emotions, which I've actually done before.
Yeah,
So I feel like
yeah.
these are part of the elements, and I think right now, what's possible, I think more places right now are seeing that they need to bake this into part of their programming for enterprise. That's one of the thoughts
one
I
of the
had.
topics around enterprise, you know, there will be some way to work in the metaverse. I believe in that future. I don't look at it from a device-centric focus where this is VR, this is AR, and this is mobile. We're developing across all platforms at Tripp that way because, you know, I saw that transition when computing moved from the desktop to the hand. When I first started working in mobile games at a company called Jamdat that Electronic Arts acquired in 2006, I had a Game Boy, a Nokia flip phone, a Canon camera, an MP3 player, a Texas Instruments calculator.
You had a lot.
I had a lot. I had a gadget girl, right? And, you know, now that's all come together into something that I call my phone. I do believe that there will be something in the future that I'm, you know, constantly going, where are my glasses?
Yep.
You know, and maybe that will also help correct my vision and be a navigation device for me. And definitely there's some wellness and biofeedback loops that can support me throughout. So it's really like this concept of reality layering. But as we create these metaverse experiences, I think it's up to this community to really push the envelope on trying to think about how to create an expansion of our physical reality and use these digital interfaces. And I'll just say one thing about the Evolver community that I think is really interesting. And I know you've worked with Jeremy Balanson at Stanford, and I'm getting a spam call right now to do that.
That's mindful.
Spam in the metaverse, bad idea. That's going to be really horrible. Not mindful at all. But Skip Rizzo is one of our advisors who works with veterans and using VR for helping with PTSD. And what he found was the vets who were struggling with mental health issues were more open with virtual therapists because they weren't feeling the judgment of another human being. And it doesn't replace the therapist, but it was a tool to help these men primarily express emotion in a way that maybe they wouldn't feel comfortable doing in the presence of another person. And when Tripp and Evolver joined forces this year, Jeremy was telling me, the founder of Evolver, who's here today, about how one of their most popular discussions, outside of the ones you've done in Evolver, which apparently have been the most popular, are around death and dying, and that people will open up on these difficult topics. And what I've been calling this digital veil, there's some kind of psychological safety present. And for men specifically, being on these gaming platforms that we can reach, where there's still a stigma around addressing mental health issues more. So, and that can even be to varying degrees based on cultural background as well. You know, this might be a really interesting application for mental health, and you know,
the research is really supporting that, and also supporting both plasticity of our own mindsets, the ways we can expand that, going beyond feeling judged to feel like you have more opportunities, again, back to flow state. And I've noticed 3', you know, talk about right now as a really seminal moment, 3' indicators that now is a great time to talk about wellness across different industries. The first is that people have a different attachment to time. So a lot of people have different approaches to their workday. They need to have a different sort of baked in approach to how they're managing both their time and
It's
also
about
their
a
mental
third
state.
of the time, right?
Yeah, a third
Your
of the time.
perceived time in VR is about a third of the actual time. So
Right.
somebody was, I think they'd
Yep.
done some research with oncology infusions, you know, because the average chemo session is about 2 hours.
You can make that even more mindful as you have an experience
Right.
that gives you a journey and
Well,
some kind of
there's
freedom.
benefit too to somebody to support them, and they have a sense that it's only 45 minutes.
So
Yeah,
in addition
that's
to
interesting.
that repurposing of time, there's also the time that we would have on a work day. Different people have more time on their hands if they're working from home, saying, oh, how do I want to approach, how do I want to create a new ritual, a new routine for myself? And the second trend I've seen with well-being and really people approaching it for business use cases is that there's more noise. How many people have more noise in your life right now? So businesses were in the middle of the pandemic, and they opened up to having more remote collaboration, and then it's back to, are there alerts coming up, are there interruptions? So there's more need for us to practice those skills of being really self-aware and having capacity.
We got a lot of feedback during the pandemic that a lot of moms were escaping into Tripp to, because they weren't used to having kids home all the time, and so it became like this respite. And it's a funny thought to think about using technology to unplug, but the immersion of VR is a wonderful respite, and I found it refreshing when I was doing those early Oculus demos, and that's what got me to investigate some of the research. And I reached out to Walter Greenleaf and Skip and said, I got funding on this idea, now I have to build it. And
well, once you put it out there, then people suddenly want it. I've been building wellness and creativity experiences for groups to have social interactions in VR spaces, and it's amazing to see people, they'll drop in during the day, make it part of their workday, and then say to me, well, I had an hour with you in VR and I came out feeling refreshed and relaxed and able to do more in terms of my productivity. And I think that's really the sweet spot. How can we optimize the way that someone is feeling and their connection inside and out, and not say it's binary, you have to disappear into the metaverse.
Right. Well, but we should talk about some of the things not to do,
Sure.
Because we have like 7 minutes left. And
this is the gravity in addition to the levity.
well, but I do think just even we've seen some stupid things already with like land being scarce in the metaverse. It's an infinite space.
And
I
why?
mean, and you look at some of the behavior around NFTs and burning NFTs and rug pulls and, all the bad actors. How do you bring in advertising in a way? It's a much closer connection to the person. And we can see how the algorithms can manipulate your mental and emotional states. I do believe we have to proceed with caution, with, defining some kind of standards around this that are responsible.
And I think it's also, I agree completely, and I think there's a fluency question of what do we actually mean? What does it mean when we're talking about metaverse, and what are the measures? I know, we mentioned Jeremy Bailenson, and I was talking with him pretty recently about emotion and about empathy. And he was saying, actually, some of the metrics about empathy have to do with full body capture of the way that I'm posed. If I'm looking at something, my attention in VR is showing that I have empathy because I'm with you. So there's a lot of different ways that you can approach the metrics to capture new data points and have more of that feedback be part of our design loop in designing even better mindfulness experiences and well-being experiences for the future.
Right. Okay.
So that's what I'm excited about, because it's iterative, and then you as people who are experiencing things in social get to play a part in saying, this is what I want for next gen wellness. This is how I want it to feel.
Yeah, I think that is an interesting concept. I like the idea of live experiences focused around wellness and how that could evolve beyond just, we're doing 40 live group meditations a week now in VR, right? And they'll be, many avatars attending on a regular basis, I think, but where do we take the concept of experience, this communal, collective experience, and I'm excited about exploring that. Should we open it up for a couple questions? We have a few minutes left if anyone would like to ask any questions. We have, at Tripp, we definitely have seen some very powerful user interactions, even just with our own experience, especially during the pandemic. Some people using our app at end of life and how it helped them to be, we have this feature where you can upload your own life images into our experience through the mobile app that we have, and we saw people uploading images of themselves when they were healthy, when they were, dealing with a terminal disease, to remind themselves of who they really are and what their journey is.
And were they doing that individually, or did they do it so they could share it with others?
Well, we found that as the caregivers started to be more and more present, that they were finding comfort from using the experience as well. So, sometimes it's important just to get stuff out and up and running and start to, this is why we love gamers. We're on PlayStation and the Quest and the HTC Vive Flow, which is more wellness focused. But the gamer audience will tell you immediately like what you got wrong and where you can be better, and at a scale that can be demoralizing if you take it personally. I look at it as instructions on how to win.
Oh, I love it.
Because they're so passionate.
I treat a lot of experience design as games with the 4 Ps of project, passion, peers, and play. That's Seymour Papert. I think that it needs to have that sense of engagement in the design.
Cool, we have a question.
Are there questions?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Raj.
Hi, Raj.
Hi, Raj.
I'm really enjoying this discussion. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Sure.
I have a question about metrics. So when you were building Tripp,
Yep.
can you talk a little bit about some of the early iterations for
Yeah.
how you could see that people are entering into these states that
Yeah.
you're targeting?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I came up to a conference at Stanford and I met Giuseppe Riva and Walter Greenleaf. It was very generous with me on guidance. And one of the things I wanted from him was to understand how to collect data in the experiences in a way that we could validate our assumptions. So he pointed me to some foundational research that had been collected over several years using XR for health, and specifically mental health, and a lot of it was by Giuseppe Riva and Jeremy and Skip Rizzone. So we looked at that, and that informed our design choices. As game developers and experience creators, we're going to take a different spin on it, but he also connected us with the National Mental Health Innovation Center, and they helped us design the scales that we put in our app. They're based on standard scales that are used in the mental health industry, which is mostly survey collected data. And we thought if we could create a large enough body of data from our users on that, we could map it to existing data sets, and that's been the case. We have over 5 million sessions now of Tripp where we've been collecting mood data, asking people before and after how they feel, and we know everything that they saw and heard in that session. So it's a pretty rich data set now, but that helps us understand what's working, what's not, how that might vary by cohort. And some of the things we learned along the way from that data, women like more, if you identify as a woman, at least in our system, the more terrain-based environments as opposed to kind of floating out in space. So that was kind of an interesting data. We see different usage patterns, so we're still just learning. Right now, it's one size fits all while we're collecting the data, but the future would be to start targeting down to at least the cohort and then eventually to the individual.
It's a great question. And I would add that I mix the qualitative with the quantitative. And
Yeah.
right now, there are amazing devices coming out that can give a lot of biofeedback. And once you have
We
that,
just got a cool
yeah.
patent. We were able to detect early on the gyroscope can pick up respiratory rate and heartbeat. It's sensitive enough. There's a little head nod. And we filed that when we first started the company. We just got it April 5th.
So we're jumping here to one more question, and I would want to add that I'm starting a program called Flow Camp, where there's a guidance for people to get into a state of flow and have fun with it. So for corporate groups, it's just really nice to
Caitlin
use
just
that
needs
data.
to come work for Tripp.
Yeah,
we
it's
love
always
Caitlin.
talking about the thing and then giving someone an experience firsthand to say, well, how does your body feel? Because your body's feelings are the best data point, I think, that you can have. Is there a question right there?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. I'm Katie. I worked on the Altspace VR team. I'm now in Microsoft Mesh, and a lot of what you're talking
awesome.
about resonates a lot. And the thing that I found interesting that came out of South by Southwest this year for a lot of conversations around the metaverse was somebody said that the opportunity of the metaverse would introduce something between capitalism and communism, and kind of rethinking how we think about the economy of the internet or the metaverse. And I think that everything you're saying about, do we have finite amount of things in the metaverse? Do
Right.
we how do we rethink maybe some of the ills or opportunities of the internet as we think about the metaverse, especially folks that are thinking about more the platform layer?
Yeah.
What do you think about that, and especially from a mindfulness perspective? What should we keep in mind as creators?
Yep, we
Wow.
have some ideas around that we're not quite ready to totally talk about, but I'm really interested in creating incentive loops that drive behavioral changes that are positive for the individual. And then also when you look at the mobile computing platform, it created all these new economies, like the gig economy didn't exist. I think there will be new types of earning models in the metaverse. I mean, just the fact that NFTs, I know there's a lot of negativity around them, but I have artist friends who, for the first time in the last year, were actually able to make a real living, you know, for their art. And I think that is the goodness of the potential. And you know, scarcity models suck, et cetera. But I think if we can look at things that can drive positive behavioral changes, and that can be a way that brands, I think, could help participate in a true contribution way in that.
And companies are developing new metrics for success. So what does success look like? Then there can be more investment in well-being.
Right.
And then this distributed network of social trust gets to lead the way. That's
Right.
what I believe.
Yeah.
And I know we're really low on time, so we're getting called to say that the session needs to close. But I feel like this is the beginning. So if you consider this an appetizer to talking about a mindful metaverse, I know that would fill my heart. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. And
Thank you,
one
Nanea.
last thing I would just want to say, if you're making anything cool in, you know, that would be a good part of Tripp, come talk to us. We'd love to work with talented creators. Thank you so much.
May the flow and the force be with you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nanea. That was great.